thing with some question and answers from Dr. Renetta Tull, who will be discussing increasing engineering identity among diverse students through global engagement, and Stephanie Farrell, who will be discussing climate change in the LGBTQ inclusion in engineering. With that being said, our speakers will introduce themselves a little more thoroughly, discussing their home institutions and where the universities they represent. Myself, my name is Dr. David Delane, and it's been an honor to serve over the past 2 years as the Vice President within IFEES, representing diversity and inclusion. Within this role, we have made much gains in the global community with respect to how diversity and inclusion is considered, researched, and implemented. And while we are just getting started, we seek to create much more global impact. And this is one of the things that we're looking to initiate and continue through this webinar. So I'm going to provide a little background to why diversity and inclusion is critical and something that engineering education community must be aware of and consider and act upon worldwide. So of course we know that the economies in the world has been pushing more towards a globalized system and a knowledge economy. And we know that economies are only globally competitive when all members of their societies are able to contribute. However, STEM and engineering careers are not inclusive. Obtaining full and equal representation from all members of societies requires that we act, or first that we recognize where inequalities, where injustices, where imbalances are taking place, that we thoughtfully consider, research, and investigate the origins of these challenges, and then we act to minimize them. This has been done primarily through the field of diversity and inclusion and through research and scholarship and broadening participation. Now, diversity has become a popular and a trendy word, but it's often misunderstood as to what it represents. I will provide a definition from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. It states, diversity is the ways in which we differ as individuals or organizations and the commonalities and similarities that justify and motivate all people and entities to work together in order to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. And so diversity is about recognizing difference, leveraging it, and combining it for positive outcomes. That's slightly different from just being a different or an individual with a varied set of characteristics. They must come together for mutual beneficial outcome. The second piece is inclusion, which is often left off. Inclusion is the enabling of full and equitable participation in and progression through higher education for all prospective and existing students. So not only do we need to recognize their difference, we need to welcome them and include them within what we do. So now that we have an established foundation, let's talk about how IFEES has worked to promote this platform. So in 2013, IFEES recognized that this was a critical issue, and within the World Engineering Education Forum, established the first conference-wide session on diversity and inclusion. And this was groundbreaking.
On mute.
Hello, yes.
I mean, not your mic, but your speakers.
Yeah.
Hi, I will continue. And so,
yeah. So just focus on what you need to do.
Hi, so this focus on diversity and inclusion in Singapore was important, as after the session, we recognized that we had many individuals in our audience asking us.
Oh, sorry, I need to turn off my phone.
Sure, I understand.
Sure, so these individuals would ask us, what is diversity and inclusion? At that point, we recognized that we needed to take a much stronger and much more systematic approach to systematically disseminating the outcomes of diversity and inclusion around the world. That being said, in Florence, Italy, the World Engineering Education Forum in 2014, the current president of IFEES established a vice president for diversity and inclusion, highlighting and promoting this issue as a critical area of which IFEES will act. Since then, the organization and its members have continued effort, have performed much research, have published these outcomes, and are working towards the global dissemination and growth of diversity and inclusion within the field of engineering education. So where does that leave us? Currently, there is substantial infrastructure, substantial research that is going on within this field. Much of it's coming from the United States, but many other parts of the world, South Africa, Australia, are very active in this area. So moving forward, how can our global community collaborate, and what should we do throughout the session? We want you to listen, and we want you to recognize that as our partners are speaking, there's many pathways open for collaboration and partnership. If you would like us to partner with you in your local institution, region, or country, we would be happy to do that. So first, what can we do? Action is always critically important. Developing research-informed programming and working towards creating a more equitable engineering community is critical. Disseminating outcomes. Performing research and publishing on these outcomes and sharing it to the worldwide community is critical for us to continue to grow. Lastly, collaboration. As we continue our programming, we must build partnerships internationally so that the outcomes are spread more effectively. So to finish my introduction here, we've often heard comments along the lines of, I don't know how to do diversity and inclusion. How do I make it happen? And at the end of the day, there's a wide spectrum of action that can be taken to promote a more equitable engineering system. And so it starts with a basic respect for humanity, actively respecting all of those in the engineering workplace and environments. Respect, eye contact, a handshake, and recognizing that everyone should be invited and can potentially have a place in engineering is critical. Our presentations today will reflect these issues from a wide-ranging perspectives, and we're happy to have you with us. As we move forward, our emails are available. We will continue to work towards systematically improving and disseminating the diversity and inclusion outcomes worldwide. We're happy to have you with us, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future. So at this point, I will allow our next speaker the microphone, Dr. Renetta Tull. I'm happy to allow you to introduce yourself, and you can begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Delane, and thank you to IFEES. It's really an honor to be here and to be with you. So I am the Associate Vice Provost now for Strategic Initiatives. My title has changed at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen with you, and we will get right into the presentation that I've prepared. So this morning, I'm going to be talking about increasing engineering identity among diverse students through global engagement. And as part of my job in Maryland, I'm the Special Assistant to the Senior Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs for the 12 institutions in the University System of Maryland, where I also direct the pipeline professional development programs. I've already mentioned my position at UMBC, and I'm also professor of the practice in the College of Engineering and IT at UMBC. Further, I do have the wonderful honor to be the interim vice president of initiatives for LACSE, which is the Latin and Caribbean Consortium of Engineering Institutions. This picture that you see here on the screen is me with some of my colleagues and some of our students from the University of Maryland College Park, as well as UMBC, and I have a colleague from the University of Maryland Eastern Shore in Costa Rica. We were at the LACSE conference last year, had taken a group of students to engage in that conference and to engage in that engineering community. And so this presentation is going to give some examples of that kind of engagement and some of the things that we've been doing over the past few years. So for our worldwide audience, just to provide some context, I'm here in Maryland, which is near Washington, D.C. This morning, we have a lot of rain here on the East Coast of the U.S. And I'm really pleased to have the sponsorship of several of our well, particularly the National Society, the National Science Foundation, excuse me, which is providing the funding for our Promise AGAP, Alliance for Graduate Education and the Professoriate, which serves graduate students and postdoctoral scholars, and our University System of Maryland Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. A lot of the programs that you hear about today are also having some sponsorship from the National Science Foundation's Directorate in Engineering, and I'll be talking about that further. So for context, when I'm talking about diversity from our point of view based on our funding, we're talking about the underrepresented minorities in the United States. And many people don't like to use the term minority because it makes people seem less than, sort of puts them in a category of less than. But for the context of our conversation, I'm focusing on folks that are from racial and ethnic backgrounds that are underrepresented in the United States. And when we look at it from an academic context, this is one of the charts from Science and Engineering Indicators, which looks at science and engineering bachelor's degrees, the degrees earned at the master's and doctorate levels. And I want to draw your attention to some of the numbers. You can see at the bottom in the green where it says S&E doctorates at 7.3%. That is saying that the number or the percentage of science and engineering doctorates in the United States that are earned by people who have underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds is only at 7.3%. So this is very, very low. And when we look at the number of people from racial and ethnic groups that are considered underrepresented minority in the United States, the numbers based on the population census are about 13% African American, approximately 17% Hispanic or Latino. The numbers for American Indians is a lot smaller, as is Pacific Islanders. Those are in the single digits. And so the numbers are small in the United States in terms of population, even smaller when we look at academic outcomes. And if we look at the number of people who are Black or African American, Hispanic, American, Indian, Alaska Native, you can see that in terms of earned science and engineering doctoral degrees by these US citizens and permanent residents, in 2013, we only had a total of about 3,000 who had earned those doctorates. That's very small compared to the approximately 24,000 earned doctorates from US citizens and permanent residents in the United States as a whole. And I always like to give the number of engineering. When you look at engineering professors, the number of engineering professors in the United States overall is at about 27,000. When you look at people who are in my ethnic background, which is African American, the numbers are much, much smaller, more like 100. And so the next thing that I would like to do is to share a little bit about underrepresentation in global experiences. This is from the Open Doors Report Institute for International Education, because we wanted to look to see, well, are underrepresented students studying abroad? Do students in STEM have opportunities to study abroad? And we see that the numbers are very low, only about less than 10% of students from underrepresented backgrounds, well, a little bit over that, but they're not really studying abroad. And then there's only about 23% who are in STEM and going to these different countries to study abroad. So what we did in Maryland is we developed some cohort-based guided and short-term types of international engagement experiences that were built around our international engineering education conferences, particularly LACSE, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the WEEF conference, the World Engineering Education Forum. These were structured, they're managed, and I really appreciate the communities of IFEES, of WEEF, of LACSE, because they were welcoming to students who in the past, many of them had not been part of international communities. In many cases, our students were traveling abroad for the first time. So here are just some icons of some of the conferences with which we've been involved. We had a chance to take a large delegation, and large being about 15 students. And you can imagine the cost that went into taking about 15 students from the United States to Ecuador. We took them to Ecuador in 2014 for the LACSE conference, and took another delegation to Costa Rica in 2016 for the LACSE conference. And we were welcomed very warmly by the executive director, Dr. Maria Laurando Petri, and the various presidents over the years. In the past, the ESPOL provost, Dr. Celia Paredes, and the current president of LACSE, Dr. Jose Carlos Cuadrado. We've also involved our students in the World Engineering Education Forum, the WEEF Forum, started in Cartagena, where we took our first students in 2013. And then we involved a larger group of students in Seoul this past year for the WEEF conference, where they had an opportunity to participate in SPEED, the student platform for engineering education development. And SPEED has been a great organization that has been involved in a variety of the engineering education conferences around the world, whether it's LACSE or the WEEF conference. We've also worked with them in India at the College of Engineering at Pune. But we have seen that global engagement has built cultural competency, STEM identity, leadership skills, and retention for our students. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures just to give you an indication of our students who have been involved in some of these efforts. In this picture, we have some of our students and some of our visiting faculty who had been involved with our Promise AGEP program, as well as our Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation program at the Bridge to the Doctorate level, who were connecting with students at ESPOL, which is the engineering, one of the largest engineering universities and institutions in Ecuador, in Guayaquil, Ecuador. There were students who were very active in the Industrial Engineering Society there, who served as hosts for us. And our students had a chance to talk with them and share about research, about collaborative efforts, humanitarian engineering kinds of initiatives, etc. When our students go to the conferences, they engage in the team types of projects that are led by SPEED, the Student Platform for Engineering Education Development. And here you have some of our students who were undergraduates who are now in graduate school at Georgia Tech, for example, at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. But when they were transitioning between undergraduate and grad school, they participated in the conference with us at Costa Rica. And interestingly enough, the students have taken this international engagement and really been able to capitalize on it. In fact, one of the students here, Mayela Page, who's right in the front, recently was a winner of the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Programs Fellowship, the GRFP, which is a very prestigious fellowship here in the United States. And we are very pleased to be able to offer this opportunity to be involved with students at the Student Forum, which LACSE calls FLE, and be involved with activities of SPEED, where they worked on issues related to the National Academy of Engineering's Grand Challenges. When our students participate in the conferences, it's a mandate for us that they also submit a research abstract so that they can present their research in either poster form or in oral form to have that research exchange. And so that has been very beneficial to our students at both the undergraduate level and the graduate level. In this picture, you also see to the far right, Dr. David Delane, who opened our session this morning. Dr. Delane, in his role and capacity as assistant professor of engineering education at The Ohio State University, also has in his past a membership as a fellow for the National Science Foundation's LSAMP Bridge to the Doctorate program. And so as an alumni member of LSAMP BD, he served as a guest mentor to our students while they were there in Costa Rica, talking with them about research, talking with them about engagement and advancement and cultural competency. And so that was really a wonderful opportunity for our students to have there in Costa Rica. When our students go to these conferences as part of our funding from NSF, they are not just going on vacation. And in addition to the research that they are presenting and disseminating, they have daily assignments. And so these assignments include assessments, some focus groups, some blogging there on location. In the far left-hand corner, we had in 2014 for our LACSE conference in Ecuador, an opportunity to post questions daily related to the conference and have students answer those questions. There is an IRB from the Institutional Review Board that is associated with these projects. Their blog posts are cleared for consent for use in research. But as you can see, there were 186 comments with the blogging, and this is part of our engagement that we invoke while students are there. We have focus group breakfasts, we talk in the afternoon, we have groups where we discuss different issues after plenary sessions, etc., and the students blog about those with focused questions. You can see that it happened again in 2016 for the project in Costa Rica, and we did it again in Korea. On the right side, we also ask our students to post via social media. And so they are tweeting while they're there. On the right side, you see two of our students, Hector Medina and Sadi Habib, who are mechanical engineering graduate students at UMBC. And they were in Korea and presented their work on teaching and pedagogy in the field of engineering education. So in addition to doing their research in mechanical engineering, they're also looking at teaching methods and different kinds of ways that they can disseminate information in the classroom and particularly improve laboratory function based on some work that they did with Dr. Tim Topolewski, who is a mechanical engineering professor at UMBC. At the bottom here, very proud to have our Dean of Engineering, Dr. Julia Ross, who is also a member of the GEDC, the Global Engineering Deans Council, who was in Korea for the WEEF conference in 2016, and she connected with one of our graduate students, Gloria Opoku Boateng from the College of Engineering IT, and they had a chance to take a picture together to talk about various issues, and Gloria is now Dr. Opoku Boateng. She participated in SPEED in Korea and just received her PhD last month and will be working for Northrop Grumman going forward with an eye toward a future faculty position in the future. She's going to do some work in industry, keep up her research, continue to publish, and may enter the faculty later after having some experience in industry. One of the things that we found is very important was developing the STEM or the engineering identity among our students. And if we look at some of the social science research, we look at work by Carleone and Johnson, and we notice that there are two factors involved in STEM identity. One of them is that the student has to recognize themselves in the role of engineer or scientist. But at the same time, significant others within the hierarchy of the discipline and in the field have to also recognize the students in that role. And what we found is that in these global spaces, there are a number and have been a number of researchers internationally who have affirmed our students in their engineering roles. There's work in third place or alternative spaces where the third place is not home, it's not work. We have considered some of the places and spaces through which our Promise AGEP has its programs, including these global conferences, to be third or alternative spaces. There's some other work by Solorzano, Ki, and Yoso, where they talk about counter spaces, fostering learning and in nurturing and supportive environment. And so this particular quote, which is very long on the screen, is from one of our students. And it just captures a number of the different qualitative kinds of data that we have collected from our students, where identity is who and what you are, and thinking about STEM identity and the international experience and how it makes up a lot of the STEM identity. I'm going to just read what happened in bold, where the student said, being a member of the global engineering community has positively impacted my research goals in graduate school. The student also says that everyone should have an international travel experience, especially within the STEM community. I had a chance to write a little bit about this in the ASEE, American Society for Engineering Education's PRISM magazine a few years ago, talking about global exposure, so that people will encourage their students to be involved in global exposure by helping them to get a passport, learning about other cultures, etc. Some of our outcomes are that students have then later applied to and have had research accepted to other discipline-specific international conferences. For example, in IT, there's the CHI conference, and we've had students participate in Portugal now and in Canada and other places. We've had students take research internships at universities in now other countries. They've developed stronger connections to peers from a variety of countries, and faculty who have been involved have written subsequent grants to take students to other countries and develop new collaborations. We found that some of the faculty, the underrepresented faculty who we've taken to the conference, they were having their first international experience as well. That has now continued, and they have gone on from there. UMBC has been incredibly responsive and supportive to these efforts. The College of Engineering and IT did a short story sharing our blog outcomes through the mechanical engineering page and talked about the delegation there. And then there was a press release by the university where students had a chance to talk about the Global Student Forum and WEEF in Korea. And Dr. Delane also shared in that photo. And so as I get to the end of this presentation, we've learned that it's important to have active and not passive global engagement connected to the students, providing a funded and guided opportunity for students to connect, a cohort-based experience where the students are sharing in the experience together, giving deliberate attention to both career life balance and cultural issues, and then inviting them to engage. It's more than just putting a flyer on the wall or sending out an email and saying, hey, maybe you should participate in this effort, but actually talking to students often one-on-one to invite them to participate. So what's next? In 2017, next month in July, our students will be participating in the 15th LACSE conference. It's an international conference, but it will be held in Boca Raton in Florida this year. SPEED will be there, the Student Platform for Engineering Education. They'll be talking about the grand challenges. The EC Council is coming as a guest for the Student Forum to talk about their Global Cyber Olympics, and they will have a workshop called Cyber for All, and the winning teams will have a chance to go to the Netherlands to participate in the Global Cyber Olympics. We also plan to take students to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur this year in November for the World Engineering Education forum. And so I'd finally like to acknowledge the University System of Maryland, the National Science Foundation, and our Promise and AGAP programs. And also I had the honor of being one of the finalists for the Airbus Global Engineering Deans Council, and they have been very supportive of this international work. And so thank you to the IFEES audience for an opportunity to share. And if there are opportunities later to be part of the Q&A, I will welcome those opportunities. I'll now stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tull. What an incredible opportunity for us to learn a lot more about the wide range of resources and global engagement, and indeed ways that we can encourage our students and faculty to have active engagement in diversity. Next, we'd like to welcome Stephanie Farrell, who's the Professor and Chair of Experiential Engineering Education at Rowan University, and she's going to be talking to us about climate change, LGBTQ inclusion in engineering. Thanks, Stephanie. We'll go ahead and turn the screen over to Stephanie.
LGBTQ inclusive classrooms and workplaces in STEM. And I'm grateful for the chance to share with you some of the progress that we've made in this area. I'm going to start by sharing with you a letter that was written by an ASCE member and published in ASCE Prism magazine back in September of 2013. Although the letter may be a bit unsettling, I'm going to read the first part of it verbatim because I think it's very significant. So the letter was titled, "Is All Diversity Good?" And it starts out, "As a member of ASCE for a number of years, I've been rather fascinated by the diversity articles in Prism and on website. The commentaries seem to suggest that diversity is to be strongly promoted in education. Any and all diversity is good and therefore should be encouraged. But is diversity in sexual preference good if the behavior takes 5 to 15 years off a person's life expectancy? If the behavior proliferates sexually transmitted diseases? The behavior promotes a sexually promiscuous lifestyle? And the behavior is addictive and abusive? We would do well to teach the truth about the homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, transgender lifestyle." The letter goes on, but I think the first part of it illustrates the point by this ASCE member. And it promotes some very serious misconceptions about LGBTQ individuals that are prevalent even among the most educated individuals in STEM professions. The letter and then the subsequent responses from both sides also had the unintended consequence of raising awareness about LGBTQ bias in our profession. I'm going to tell the story about how a society responded to this need and the progress that we've made in the last 4 years since the letter was published. Our approach focused on this last paragraph of the letter, where it says, "We would do well to teach the truth." But before getting into that, I'm going to share a little bit of background information on the current state of LGBTQ workplace issues around the world. I think it's pretty common knowledge that LGBTQ people face challenges in terms of societal acceptance in different communities around the world. But many educated professionals, many of whom are quietly accepting, don't realize the extent to which LGBTQ individuals face bias, discrimination, and hostility within our professional space and our classrooms. In a study of US universities, 29% of LGBTQ students experience discrimination or harassment on campus. 37% were not comfortable in their own classrooms. And due to the negative environment, 30% of LGBTQ students seriously considered leaving their institutions. The situation isn't any better in the workplace. Around the world, 62% of employees hear homophobic jokes in the workplace. 53% feel that they have to hide their LGBT identity at work. And in the United States, 52% of professionals live in states where they have no workplace anti-discrimination protection. They could be fired for being LGBTQ. And around the world, there are still 10 countries where homosexuality is punishable by death and 79 countries where homosexuality is criminalized. This map shows LGBTQ rights around the world. LGBTQ is criminalized in the pink countries and punishable by death in the red countries. So even if you live and work in one of the more progressive green countries on the world map, it's a serious issue to companies who do business in countries that are hostile to LGBTQ people. How do global companies protect their talented LGBTQ employees who are assigned to projects in those hostile countries? Can their families travel with them safely? How do employees ask for protection when they don't feel comfortable being out at work? This lack of acceptance has serious impacts on business and education. If we start with the business case, there's an abundance of evidence that LGBTQ inclusion helps attract and retain the best talent. It drives innovation and boosts the bottom line. LGBTQ inclusive companies attract and retain the best talent. 72% of ally employees look for LGBTQ inclusive employers. 22% of LGBT employees look to leave a workplace when the environment is not inclusive. Inclusion drives innovation. LGBTQ employees are 30% less productive in a non-inclusive environment. As we saw in an earlier slide about being out in the workplace, this is a key indicator of workplace inclusion. When only a fraction of LGBTQ employees are comfortable enough to be out at work, this translates into a huge loss in productivity. There's a big financial benefit in creating an inclusive environment. Taking an example from a global study on workplace inclusion, it's estimated that a company of 100,000 employees in the United States could save over $9 million per year by creating an inclusive environment. Companies with an inclusive culture benefit from a 10% greater financial return than non-inclusive companies. And as I mentioned, a key indicator of workplace inclusion is whether LGBTQ employees are comfortable enough to be open about their sexual orientation or their gender identity at work. It takes an awful lot of energy, and it's very stressful to conceal something that's such an essential part of our being, a part of our lives. And this slide shows some data from an international study showing the percentage of LGBT individuals who are out in the workplace in different countries around the world. The purple bars indicate out to everyone. Even in the best case, the most open country, which is Australia, only about half of the LGBTQ employees are completely out at work. We hear about the need for more STEM professionals to meet the demands for technological solutions to global problems. In the US alone, one estimate is that we need an additional 1 million STEM graduates by the year 2022. We need to attract and retain talented students into STEM disciplines. But a key reason that students and professionals leave STEM is the chilly climate. Creating an inclusive climate benefits all students, and immersion in diversity is essential to the intellectual and social development of all students. Diversity increases innovation and productivity, and it's essential for our students to work in environments where they can be innovative and productive. I've touched a little bit on the business case and the learning case for LGBTQ inclusion, but perhaps the most important case of all was best articulated by Dr. Martin Luther King in the context of racial equality. And he said, "There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but he must do it because conscience tells him it's right." So if you recall the letter from the ASCE member that I shared with you at the beginning of this talk, I want to go back to that letter because the end of that letter sort of guided how ASCE responded through research and education. So we brought together a team of engineers and sociologists from ASCE and from different universities across the US. Excuse me. And we sought funding for a project to raise awareness about LGBTQ issues and create a more inclusive profession. When we sought funding for the project, we found that there are numerous programs for increasing participation of underrepresented groups in STEM, but none of these programs included LGBTQ in their focus. So we worked for a long time with the National Science Foundation to finally identify a funding program called EAGER. And EAGER is specifically for projects that are exploratory, transformative, and not fundable by any other mechanism. So this is the first grant in the United States to increase LGBTQ participation in STEM. And because I'm not aware of research being done in other countries on LGBTQ inclusion, specifically in STEM, the data that I'll be talking about in the next few slides is specific to the United States, but I think probably generally extendable to what's going on in other countries as well. But it is important to remember that the climate and the laws vary drastically from one country to another around the world. And there is a need for research on LGBTQ inclusion in STEM globally. Our project uses a multi-pronged approach of education, advocacy, and research. The action and education programs use a train-the-trainer approach. We formed a network of faculty who are committed to increasing LGBTQ inclusion in STEM professions. 2 meta-trainers provided facilitator training for these 20 faculty to conduct safe zone LGBTQ ally training workshops. And those workshops are online at conferences and on campuses. These workshops are very specifically focused on the engineering profession, and they focus on building inclusive classrooms and departments. The same community of faculty advocate for LGBTQ inclusion in their own departments and in their own professional societies. The research part of the project studies STEM culture and identifies barriers to inclusion. We use the findings from the research to refine the workshops and advocacy efforts. The research began with a survey of engineering deans in the United States, and we had about 47 responses to the survey. And about 1/3 of the deans were aware of LGBTQ climate issues in their own colleges. And most of them indicated that they would support specific measures to increase inclusion. But interestingly, the deans thought that their faculty would be unsupportive of such measures. So the deans may be untapped allies in efforts to increase inclusion. And if they're correct that faculty might resist, then we might need to focus more effort on faculty engagement. We also launched a nationwide study of LGBTQ students. The study was of all students, but we collected demographic information, including gender, racial, and ethnic identity, as well as LGBTQ identity. And what we found is that LGBTQ students were more likely than their non-LGBTQ peers, more likely than women, more likely than racial and ethnic minorities to report a chilly climate in their departments. The students reported feeling marginalized and not respected. This has serious personal consequences, including emotional stress, difficulty sleeping, and exhaustion. So we come to the education piece, and that's where we go back to that letter that was published in PRISM that ended up with a sentence that was something along the lines of we would do well to teach the truth about lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. Sorry. We responded by developing Safe Zone Ally training workshops that are specifically geared towards engineering professionals. We introduced them first at the ASEE conference in 2014. The idea of the trainings is to create a visible network of allies who are aware of bias, have the skills to disrupt discrimination, and who can support LGBTQ students and colleagues. In that first year, we offered 12 Safe Zone workshops, one in every single session of the conference. By the end, we had trained over 150 participants, and to date, we've trained over 650. We've developed partnerships with some companies and professional societies to expand the training beyond ASEE membership. We've brought our workshops to conferences at the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, the American Chemical Society, and through a partnership with IFEES at the World Engineering Education Forum. Dow has partnered with us and sent a strong message of support from their leadership. The president of one of the Dow divisions co-facilitated one of our Safe Zone workshops at an AICHD conference. In order to increase the impact of the workshops, we also introduced online training in April 2016. We've now conducted 8 online workshops with 200 participants at a wide variety of institutions across the country, public, private, in different geographic areas and different political and social climates. And at many of these institutions, the participants didn't have access to Safe Zone training on their own campuses. So this training has helped create a visible network of allies at institutions across the country. And as I mentioned, the members of the community who serve as the facilitators of those workshops and are working to bring inclusion into their professional societies, they're also doing advocacy work in their own departments. And so I wanted to kind of wind up by sharing with you some of the accomplishments of the community members who've advocated for LGBTQ inclusion in their own departments. The members have brought the Safe Zone workshops to their own campuses and invited LGBTQ department seminar speakers as well to come and talk with their departments. They've successfully advocated for preferred name policies and gender-inclusive restrooms on campus. Our members have started student chapters of an LGBTQ STEM professional society called OSTEM. They've developed alumni networks and mentoring programs, and they've garnered dean's support for an LGBTQ faculty group. In one case, an LGBTQ faculty member was invited to a holiday party with his partner for the first time since he joined the department 25 years ago. This is just one data point, but I wanted to mention it because I think it's a powerful example of a shift towards inclusion that had a profound personal significance for that faculty member. And I just want to close by acknowledging the support from the National Science Foundation, ASCE, and IFEES, one of our partner societies. And now I will turn it back over to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. What an interesting and meaningful presentation you gave us. To our attendees, we would strongly encourage you to engage with our presenters at this point. We have a Q&A option, and I know each of our presenters are excited to hear your questions and ideas. So indeed, this is a global dialogue amongst all of us. So please feel free to use the Zoom technology with the Q&A function if there are things that you would like to discuss with our presenters during this time. Until that point, though, what we would like to do also is bring to light the GEDC Airbus Diversity Award. As we mentioned about this webinar, we'd like to not only provide you with intriguing information about inclusion and diversity, but we also wanted to provide a wide range of resources that you heard from Dave Delane, Renetta Tull, and Stephanie Farrell. One of those resources is the GEDC Airbus Diversity Award. This award is amazing because it reaches out to communities around the world to highlight our leaders in diversity. We'd like to share with you a short video about the details of the Diversity Award and also remind you that nominations are open through July 24th. So let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about the video now. If you're interested in learning more about the Diversity Award, you'll be able to find more at www.diversityenengineering.com. And we're going to go ahead and close the session with David Delane.
Thank you, Dr. White. And I think a special thanks is deserved to all of our speakers today, Dr. Renetta Tull, Dr. Stephanie Farrell. I think their presentations were amazing and critical for our global community to hear. Many of us believe that the world is at an important turning point, and some see that the possible future could be negative. While I believe, and I believe my colleagues do as well, that this turning point is an opportunity and ultimately will be positive. As we have been shown, this exciting and impactful research will continue. And while IFEES is global, this presentation today, this webinar, was focused on a US perspective. And now, while this was not intentional, we often do seek and always do seek global diversity and input and inclusion from our peers all over the world. The fact that our webinar was mostly US based illustrates a shortcoming. While our infrastructure is growing, global research and collaborators outside of the US within diversity and inclusion are limited and have been challenging for us to contact, identify, and collaborate with. we do want to continue to connect with our peers across these gaps to learn from them, as well as support them with similar actions and similar research. If we would be honored and grateful if you could support us in sharing our contact information, contacting us yourselves, and encouraging your colleagues who are researchers, program directors, activists, or allies from around the world to join us and expand this important work. Our contact information and email, I'm sure, can be provided by our webinar hosts online, and of course, we can be found through Google fairly easily. My email is delaine.4@osu.edu, delane.4@osu.edu. For any international partnerships, for joining in these exciting research efforts that are going on, please feel free to reach out, and we will be one step further towards accomplishing our goal. Together, we can ensure that this impending turning point in our world does turn into a positive direction. And so we thank you for being part of this webinar. We thank our speakers again. We thank our hosts, the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies, and Dr. Christina White, all the IFEES members and partners working behind the scenes. Always a special thanks to Hans Hoyer. And we look forward to seeing many of you at the American Society of Engineering Education Conference this next week. We welcome you to Columbus, Ohio, and come visit us at the Ohio State University's Department of Engineering Education as well. Thank you, and we will talk soon. Christina, I'm not sure if you will close.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to having you share our resources again with your colleagues and students. And our next webinar will be starting in September. Please do touch base with IFEES if you have any questions. We will also be sending out a follow-up survey. And again, a very special thanks to the IFEES Secretariat, to each of our very special presenters, and to each of you attendees for joining us today. We're hopeful to continue this global dialogue in cutting edge and interesting engineering education initiatives. Thank you.